seated. Well, I know it didn't feel like it, but summer is here, right? I know, and they say that you can't do anything until July 5th, right? That's like the cutoff date where you actually start to experience summer here. But summer is here, and so we've been around our house. We've been doing all kinds of projects. We had family come in, and so it kind of elevates the level of importance of doing projects around our house. And one of the projects we've worked on is our backyard. And so we've done a lot of planning and a lot of things in the backyard to kind of make it more, look like an oasis, a place where you can go and just kind of hang out and spend time together. And one of the things that we came across as we were working in the backyard was we had this set of trees along our fence line. And these are the trees that we have on that fence line right there, little small trees. But they're trees all nonetheless. And I don't even know what kind of tree this is. I just know it's tree. But they were all kind of compacted together, and we wanted to move one of them. And so I decided, being the green thumb guy that I am, I decided I'm going to go ahead and move one of those trees to another location, to a little more spacious location so that it'd be able to thrive. Here's that tree right now. And just so we can have a real true compare and contrast here. Now, that's the saddest looking Charlie Brown tree like in the entire world right there. So one of three things is true about this tree. Number one, I either killed this tree. It is dead, right? It is like completely dead. Because all the leaves are brown and it's just looking really ratty. The second thing is that it's in shock, right? Sometimes when you move a plant or a tree, especially one that's thriving in an area, and you put it into another area, it actually takes a little season of adjustment. And this kind of thing can happen to plants and trees and shrubs and stuff like that whenever you make that big, huge move for them. Or the third thing is simply that it's not getting what it needs. Where it was at originally, it was either richer soil, or it was being watered more often, or it had the right amount of sunshine in order to make it work. And where it's at right now, it's not getting one of those main priorities for it. And so one of those three things is true about it. Now here's why I tell that story, because I believe that what we're going to talk about today, and the passage that we're going to look at, and if you got a Bible, you can turn to James chapter 2. That's where we're going to be at. It's a very famous passage that we're going to be looking at, and I think it tells the story, though, of these two trees, particularly in the context of us and how our lives look. That you can actually tell whether or not we are thriving in our relationship with Jesus by the way that we appear to outsiders, by the way that we appear to those around us. And so I want to walk through this passage. James chapter 2, verse 14 is where we're going to start off today. I want to remind everyone, though, as we start here, James was a letter. So when we read James, think about it in the context of a letter. The chapters and the verses were added later on, so it would make it easier for all of us to be able to sit here and go, turn to James chapter 2 instead of, hey, turn to that place in James where he starts talking about trees and stuff, right? It really does help us that way. But one of the ideas here is that it was designed to be read as a letter. And so I've been challenging you all along the way to make sure that throughout the week, at some point, I would encourage you just to sit down and take the 12 minutes it takes to read through the entire letter from James. James was the brother of Jesus, and he knew what it looked like as one of the leaders of the church in Jerusalem. He knew what it looked like to be people who not only experienced persecution for their faith, but also who learned how to live out their faith in the way that they love God and the way that they love people around them. And so James, as he's writing this letter to followers of Jesus, he continues on in that letter, and in verse 14 says this. He says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds?" Like what point is it that you say that, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus, you have faith in Jesus, but you have no deeds? In other words, your life does not reflect what you say. It says, can such faith save them? In other words, can all of that talk, can that actually demonstrate that you have saving faith? Now we are convinced as followers of Jesus that it is grace that saves us. In fact, Paul, kind of his counterbalance to all of this, in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 9 says this, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and it is not from yourselves. It's actually a gift from God." In other words, God's the one who gives us salvation. He gives us his grace. He says, not by works so that no one can boast. So there's nothing that I could ever do to earn my relationship with God, right? There's nothing that I could ever do. I can never be good enough. I can never give enough. I can never show up at church enough. I can never do enough mission. I can never do enough to ever earn my relationship with God. It is strictly by grace that God introduces me to himself and invites me to be a part of his family. It's the same way for all of us. Every single one of us, the reason why, if you are a follower of Jesus in this room, the reason why is because Jesus invited you to be a part of that. And he did it by his grace and by his mercy. Not because you were good enough, not because you were smart enough, and doggone it, not because people liked you. It was simply because of the fact that he had mercy upon you and extended grace to you and invited you to be a part of his family. That's the only way any of us get in. That's the only way any of us experience a relationship with God. And if that's the way we get in, then that's the way that we maintain our relationship with God, by grace, by mercy. Now, what James is doing, he's saying, but hey, don't take advantage of that, right? You couldn't earn your relationship with God, but don't think that kind of gets you off from having to actually allow the things that you say are true about your relationship with God to manifest themselves out, to flesh their way out in the way that you live, particularly in the way that you love God and the way that you love people around you. And so James, in order to make it a little more practical, he kind of puts it in this way. In verse 15, he says, so suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food, right? So when you look around you, he says, suppose there's somebody, not just somebody who's like out there, imaginative people out there, but suppose somebody, look around here, suppose somebody in this room was without clothes. Awkward, I know, but maybe not enough clothing. Maybe that would be the more accurate way of saying that. Or without daily food. They were struggling. They did not have what they needed in order to survive. They did not have what they needed in order to live in our world. It says, suppose one of you see one of your brothers or your sisters is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, hey, go in peace, keep warm and well fed. Oh, I see you're struggling right now. Well, I hope it works out for you. You look like you're hungry. Maybe you should go eat something. You don't have enough clothes? Well, man, you should go clothe yourself then. You should take care of yourself. So suppose someone turns to them and says, hey, I see the need. I see what you're going through. I have the means in order to take care of that need, but I'm just going to give lip service to that. I'm just going to say the things that I think are the things that you need to experience, but I'm not going to do anything about that. He says, what good is it? What practical, actual good is that? You're saying all the right things, it just doesn't translate into action. Now, as followers of Jesus, man, that's our struggle, isn't it? Especially if you've been following Jesus for a while. If you're a new follower of Jesus and you've only been walking with Jesus for a few months or maybe a year or so, it's like you're working really hard on trying to make sure that your life starts to look a little bit more like that. But if you've been following Jesus for a long time, it's easy for us to become complacent. It's easy for us to know all the right answers, to know all the right words. How many of you have actually been in a church service where they've actually talked about this specific verse before? Right? Some of you have actually taught this verse before, right? Like you've either been in Bible study or you've been in a church or an environment where you're teaching this particular verse. It's so easy for us to learn how to pay lip service. And the older you are as a believer, the more you become indoctrinated in all of the right words to say. I know this because of the fact when I talk to people that I've heard things are going poorly in their lives or they're not really doing well in their relationship with Jesus, and then I have a conversation with them, they have all of the right answers. They know all of the right language. It's just not being reflected in the way that they're living. Not in a judgmental way, not in a condemning way, but it's just not working its way out into their lives. Having all of the right words does not translate into living the right life. Verse 17, James says this, is in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action. In other words, if you say that you're a follower of Jesus and it's not accompanied by the way that you live your life, it says it's dead. Someone say, hey, you have faith and I have deeds. He says, show me your faith without deeds and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You say you've got faith, but you're not actually living it out. He says, let me just show you that I actually have faith by the way that I live this out. Let me kind of break this down for you. I've been married for 25 years to my wife, Sunny, who I believe is in this room somewhere. Anyway, so we've been married for 25 years, and it has been the most amazing 25 years of my entire life. Right? It has been a fantastic 25 years. Now, we've had our ups and downs. We've had seasons where we've had great communication, seasons where we haven't had great communication. But at the same time, this is an amazing, incredible marriage that we get to be a part of. And the thing that makes it amazing is not because whenever we walked down the aisle 25 years ago, we stood in front of all these people and we said vows to one another. And on that day, you know what I told her? I told her that I loved her. I literally told her that. I know it's crazy. I know it's hard to imagine that, right? But in that moment, when I do premarital counseling with people, the hardest thing that I have to convey to get across to them is that, hey, there will be days in your marriage where you don't necessarily feel the same way about each other that you do right now. And they're like, no, that is not true. That is so not true. It's like, do you have parents? And they're like, oh, well, maybe that is true. I don't know. But here's the thing. It's like it is easy for us in that moment where everything feels right to go, yes, I love you. I am committed to you till death do us part. All of the words, right? But then as the years go on, you have to actually start fleshing that out, living that out. And if I go to Sunny every day and I say, hey, babe, I love you. I just want you to know I love you. And then I never, ever demonstrate that in the way that I serve her, in the way that I look for her interests, in the way that I try to support her, in the way that I try to encourage her. If I never do those things and I just say, hey, I love you, at what point do you think she's going to go, do you really? I mean, do you really love me? Because you say that you do, but the way that you act doesn't demonstrate that you do. Now, in the same way, if I invested all of my time and energy, because some of you aren't, not necessarily talkers. I'm a talker, but some of you aren't necessarily, don't like to communicate very much. But if you pour your life into your spouse and invest your time and your energy into your spouse, isn't it amazing how loved they feel? Isn't it amazing how much they go, okay, I know that you love me. Now, again, they love to hear it, so make sure you say it. But it really is important that you're actually showing them that you love them. In fact, if you're feeling in a season right now in your marriage where you feel like things are a little distant and you still say the words, I love you, but you feel like there's a distance, my encouragement to you is this, that you would begin to serve one another and act like you love one another. If you start to, it's like I don't feel like it, and I don't want to be fake, right? That's kind of our excuse. I don't want to be fake. It's like, no. How about just be married then? Begin to serve one another and be a part of each other's life and invest in one another. And one of the things you'll discover is over time, once you're actually living that out with one another, that those feelings will start to come back where you actually do feel like you love one another. That's a little side note. But what James here is he's talking about, he's saying this. He's saying this is a critical, important lesson for us. He's saying just because you say that you love Jesus, if your life isn't reflecting that, then your faith is basically dead. Your faith isn't amounting to anything. It's not accomplishing. It's not a live faith. It doesn't mean you lose your salvation, but it does make you question and wonder, is it, A, that you are spiritually dead, you never were saved in the first place, B, maybe you are in relocation shock, right? Where you are placed in a new environment or a new setting, and so you're having to figure out new rhythms for what it looks like for you to actually express your relationship with Jesus with those around you. Or perhaps you're not getting what you need. Maybe you're not spending time in God's Word. Maybe you're not spending time praying. Maybe you're not receiving the sustenance that you need. Maybe you're not in community with other followers of Jesus who are there to support you and encourage you, and where you're able to support them and encourage them. Maybe you're just lacking some of the necessary nutrients, spiritual nutrients that you need in order to thrive in your relationship with Jesus. James, as he goes on, he says this, verse 19, he says, you believe that there is one God. Good. Well, even the demons believe that and shudder. So he says, oh, you believe in God? That's awesome. So does Satan. Satan believes in God, You believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Cool, you're right there with the demons. You're like that. You're like you guys like right hanging out there at the same place. In fact, their theology is probably a little bit better than yours. Like they not only know that Jesus is like raised from the dead, they were like there when it happened. They are very aware of the fact that Jesus is not only the risen Lord, but that he actually rules and reigns over the entire universe. They're very, very aware of who Jesus is, of what his role in the world is. They just don't live that out. And he's saying, you say that you believe in God? You believe that all this stuff? Okay, that's great. But man, if it doesn't begin to translate into the way that you live your life, then you're basically at the same place that all the demons are. Now, I want you to hear me. This isn't saying that you're not a Christian. It's saying that you're basically pulling the bare minimum of what it means to be a follower, though. And that your faith ultimately is not accomplishing what Jesus died on a cross. Why he was buried and resurrected, the resurrection life that Paul talks about. He says you're not experiencing that at the level that you were intended to experience that kind of life. So you need to start letting your faith escape out into the way that you live. In verse 20, he says, you foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? And then he gives us two illustrations, two examples of people in the Old Testament who had amazing faith. And he starts off with Abraham. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? So I'm pulling out the big guns here, right? Abraham's like the stalwart. He is the founder of what the whole Jewish religion finds their foundations in Abraham. When they talk about God, it's like the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He gets top billing. He's like the man. Right? And when you read about Abraham's life in Genesis, you find that he had all kinds of ups and downs and places along the way where he wasn't sure about his relationship with God, and yet he kind of continued to take steps of faith. And there was this one scene in Genesis chapter 22 whenever God spoke to Abraham, and he says, Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son, the son of promise, and I want you to take him onto the mountain to the altar, and I want you to sacrifice him. Human sacrifice, child sacrifice. Now, if you're Abraham and you're living in a region where that is common practice among all the gods, all these other gods that people believed in, they would have some form or fashion of a human sacrifice. They think that's what it takes to appease the gods. They think that's what it takes in order to make the gods happy, to provide for them their needs. And so God says, hey, Abraham, I want you to do this thing. Now, I can't imagine what Abraham was going through. I can't imagine the turmoil. As a parent, I can't fathom all the switches in your mind that have to turn in order to get to a place where you're willing to even try that. And he takes his son and his servants, and he goes to the place. And he and his son go up to where the altar is. And along the way, his son says, hey, I see the firewood, and I see the knife, and I know that we're ready to go do the sacrifice. Where's the offering, though? So his son's not even in on the story yet. And Abraham says, the Lord will provide the offering. Now, I'm not sure what Abraham was thinking in that moment, whether God was going to resurrect his son. I don't know what was going through his mind. But I knew he had confidence in faith, and that it was actually finding its way out of his mind and out of his heart and out into the way that he lived, in a place where it was going to cost him literally everything. And he gets to this place to offer up his son, and the scripture says that he began to raise the knife, and as he raised the knife, an angel of the Lord spoke to him and says, Abraham. And in that moment, Abraham said, yes, good timing. He said, Abraham, you do not have to sacrifice your son. He looked over, and there's a ram caught in the thicket, and that became the sacrifice. The Lord provided the sacrifice. Now, side note, that probably messed up their relationship for a little while. Abraham and Isaac, right? Can you imagine? Hey, Dad, remember that time you tried to kill me? Yeah, that was not a good day, right? But in that moment, Abraham demonstrated his faith in God, even to the point of it costing him everything. And so when James comes back and he harkens back to this idea, he says, this amazing thing that we call faith, this amazing thing that we call this journey with God, it actually is a costly thing at times. And it says, if you remember that our father, the father of all of us, Abraham, considered righteous for what he did whenever he offered his son Isaac on the altar. And in verse 22, he says, you see that his faith and his actions were working together. In other words, the things that he said he believed about God and the things that he actually did in his life, in his relationship, it actually was working together. He says, and his faith was made complete. That word complete means perfected. It was actually accomplished, right, by what he did. In other words, he had the words, all the words, but it actually became complete and full, had its full meaning when it started to make its way out into the way that he lived. And it wasn't just this one instance. It was instances all throughout his life. You begin to see this. And that's the key, men and women. It really is. This is the key. This is where the rubber meets the road for all of us. Because the things that we say that we believe about God, it should actually be leaking out in the way that we love God and the way that we love other people around us, the way that we're treating the people around us, the way that we love those who are hurting, the way that we reach out to those who are impoverished, the way that we express our lives in the lives of people around us. It should actually affect the way that our marriages look. It should affect the way that we treat our kids, the way that we treat our parents. It should affect every area of our lives. And I find that for a lot of us, our struggle sometimes is that we get to where we're feeling good about ourselves because we know all the right words. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up like that tree. And all of a sudden, those once green leaves are going to begin to fade. And it's going to become brittle. You get around people with like a brittle personality, just kind of, it's hard to be around. The people who say they're a Christian, but then when you get around them, it's like, ugh. There's a lot of people in the world, isn't there, that looks at Christians and go, man, if that's what a Christian means, if it means acting like that, I don't have nothing to do with that. I mean, shouldn't we be the most joyful people in the world? Shouldn't there be something about our lives that is actually attractive to the world around us? I hope so. And so he's saying that you should make sure that your faith, the things that you're saying are true, the things that you're saying you believe, that find their completion in the way that you live. Goes on, again with Abraham, it says, and the scripture was fulfilled. It says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called what? God's friend. Hearing the moniker of being a person who is called God's friend. How many of you know people who claim to be your friends but then treat you like enemies? Right? It's like you say you're my friend, but the way you treat me, the way you talk down to me, the way that you insult me all the time, the way that you're always demeaning, it doesn't demonstrate that we're actually friends. And good friends are hard to find nowadays, aren't they? Seems like everybody's wanting something, everybody's looking for something. And the older you get, it feels like you're more and more skeptical of everybody. But man, Abraham was God's friend. They had a relationship such that it would indicate that they loved one another, trusted each other. He says in verse 24, it says, you see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. And in the church, I think this is a danger. Because in the church, and especially in environments like this, it seems like the larger we get as a church, one of the struggles that we run into is that we don't necessarily know everyone, right? And so that's, a lot of people, they don't like that. It's like, I want to be at a church that I feel like I know everyone. And it's like, well, then, that's going to be a small environment of people that you actually really, 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 really know, right? But it seems like that's why we encourage life groups and people getting connected with small groups and getting involved in community where they're able to know other people and are being known. So that we, as we growing together and starting to saying all these things about that we believe are true about God and about the world around us and about our relationship with God, so that we can actually have people that we are rubbing up against on a regular basis and encouraging each other and supporting one another and spurring each other on and able to call each other on the carpet, right? Every once in a while, we're able to go, hey, you know what? I'm noticing some attitudes in your life or maybe some places in your marriage where it feels like things are kind of not working out the way that they should. Do you need someone to pray for you? Do you need some help? Do you need some guidance? Able to lean into people's lives. He says we need to make sure that we are living our life out not just by faith, but also in the way that we live. And we desperately need community in order to make that happen. Because if we don't have people around us to support us and encourage us, a lot of times we don't even realize when we're slipping. And that tree in my backyard, it didn't turn brown overnight. It was just a process over a period of time. And look out there one day and it's like, there's something wrong there. But here's the thing. Here's the equally sad thing. It's been like that for a month. We planted it. We transported it like early spring. And it was looking great for a while. During the rainy season, everything's rain here, right? I mean, but as soon as the sun came out, as soon as it started to dry out a little bit, it just started to wither and die. And I feel like there's a lot of people in our world who are followers of Christ who are withering and drying up and dying. They're trying their best to hang on to their leaves so it at least looks like a tree. And at the same time, they're not experiencing the life that God's called them to. That's a hard place to be. That's a desperate place to be. That's a difficult place to be. And so James says, man, look at Abraham's life. And while it cost him, very, very costly, he was willing to take steps of faith. And I look at that story and I'm like, Abraham. I mean, how do you compare to Abraham? I mean, you look at his whole run and everything that happened in his life, and I'm like, there's no possible way that I can compare to Abraham. Well, I love that James figured that out too, right? And so James moves on and says, okay, so maybe Abraham's too way up there for you. Let's kind of switch gears here. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute. All right, so you went from the father Abraham had many sons had father Abraham, right? I mean, that father Abraham to the lady who has no songs about her, right? Nobody's singing songs in, children's church about Rahab the prostitute, right? There was none of that happening. That is not like, going on over there, just so you know, just so you feel secure about that. Was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? So she is not even at a place where she has changed her life and professed her faith in God to the degree where it's like, look, I'm obviously a follower of God. She just simply took a risk in the moment. That's all she could do. Abraham offering his son on the altar and Rahab saying, why don't you go that way instead of that way? So somewhere in between, I'm pretty sure you can find us. Somewhere in between, every single one of us can find their place. Somewhere in between, it costs me everything. And maybe I'll take a risk this week for God. So she was considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies, sent them off in a different direction. Then he kind of culminates this section with this phrase. He says, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. In the same way that your body without your spirit is just a shell, right? He says your faith, if it's not accompanied by deeds, if it doesn't start to flesh its way out in the way you live, then spiritually you're just a shell. You're not living to the fullness that God promised, that Jesus promised, the abundant life that he offers to all of us freely. He says if you're really going to live that life, if you're going to experience that life, you've got to start letting your faith escape out of your life into the way that you live. It's like, I don't know, I don't feel it. I don't feel like I'm supposed to. It's like, same way with marriage, right? If I start acting loving towards my wife over a period of time, the feelings will come. And in the spiritual disciplines, it's the exact same way. There's some times where it's like, God, I don't feel like reading my Bible today, God. I don't feel like praying today. I don't feel like loving people. Anybody not feel like loving people on any given day? Like almost every day, you have to preach to yourself. It's like, hey, love people, okay? I mean, that's That's an ongoing thing. And honestly, some of you are hard to love. I promise you, no, not everyone, but there's sometimes where it's difficult to love people, right? But when we start to, okay, I believe this is true. Love God, love others. I'm going to start living that out. God, I'm going to start loving you the way that I live my life. I want to be a friend of God. And I'm going to start loving other people. I'm going to start pouring my life into them and serving them and giving myself away to them. Even when it costs me everything, even when it's difficult, even when I don't feel like it. That's the kind of life that begins to bring forth all of the fruit of the Spirit inside of us, all the joy and peace and everything that God promises to those who are called His. We receive that when we allow the things that we say to match up with the way that we live. So, Abraham and Rahab. I don't know where you are. I don't know where you are in your journey with Jesus and your journey with faith. Some of you may be spiritually like you're just like not even on your radar. And that's okay. The good news is this: you don't have to clean up, you don't have to fix up, you don't have to get right enough, you don't have to start doing enough. You just come as you are. The invitation that Jesus offers us is a very, very simple one. It's like, I like to take dead things and I like to make them alive. That's like what He does. And because of the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus, He can take someone who is spiritually dead on the inside and He can bring them to life. Not make bad people good, make dead people alive. He breathes life into us. And maybe that's part of your journey, and maybe this morning would be a simple opportunity for you to say yes to Jesus. Just to simply say, okay, I want to do this. Jesus, here's my life. Fix it. And maybe you've been a Christian for a while. And you've looked at all the other Christians around you, and we kind of all get together and we all start to act the same, and you know how that kind of works with that osmosis theory and faith. A lot of times we get around other Christians who aren't doing anything, and after a period of time we don't do anything either. You know that? And maybe you need to be the kind of the starter mechanism for that, to begin the process of allowing your faith to leak out into your life and to start to see fruit in the way that you live your life so that the people around you can be encouraged. Because I know this, and I tell my kids this all the time, everyone's looking for someone else to be the starting point in all of this. Looking for someone else to be the initiator. If they show their faith in the way that they live, then maybe I'll start showing my faith in the way that I live. My encouragement to all you is this: that you would be the initiator. That you'd take steps of faith in inviting Jesus to flesh out His loving, graceful life into the lives of those around you. And you'll be surprised at how much that encourages and stirs up other people towards faith and action in their own lives. I'm going to ask the worship team if they'll make their way forward, and we're going to take communion together today. And what a fitting morning for us to do that, because if you want an example that faith without works is dead, you look at the life of Jesus. Jesus believed perfectly everything about God. And Jesus found Himself at this point in the Garden of Gethsemane where He was praying. And as He was praying, He said, Lord, if there's any way, let this cup pass from me. And then He said these beautiful words. He says, but not my will, your will be done. The cross was going to be a very painful, difficult act of faith for Him. And He went there. Why? Because the joy that was set before Him, knowing not only the resurrection was coming, that new life was going to be birthed into literally billions of people worldwide, but He knew that one day He would be able to put an end to death, to pain, to suffering, to injustice. That He would be able to accomplish everything that He set forth. And that's why when we celebrate communion, that's what we're celebrating. That Jesus finished the work so that we could live by faith. If you've never taken communion with us before, I want to kind of walk us through what that looks like. We're going to sing. The band's going to lead us in a few moments, and we're going to sing together. And there are 7 stations literally all around this auditorium. There's 2 up here, 2 on over there, 2 in the back. There's 1 in the way back over there. There's gluten-free stations right up here in the front if you need that. And so when the worship team starts singing, we're all going to be standing, and we're going to go to one of the stations that's close to us, and we're going to take a piece of cracker, and then we're going to take one of the cups here, and then make your way back to your seat, and then I will lead us through the rest of that. when the time comes. But we'll take communion together in that moment. So let me pray for us, though, as we enter into this time. Jesus, thank you. Thank you so much for grace, for life, for everything you give to us, for hope, for restoration. And Jesus, I confess as just one of the many here in this room who I'm always in need of your saving grace to continue to wash over me. I feel like there's so many times in my life where I don't measure up. And so I thank you that it's not about everything we've done wrong, but I thank you it's about new and fresh starts that we all receive every single morning, that your grace is new, that your mercies are new every morning, that you invite us into this amazing, beautiful, redemptive relationship with you. And I pray that that would affect not only the way that we live our lives, but the way that we interact with people around us. Help us to be better when it comes to allowing the faith that we claim to escape out into the way that we live, and the way that we love you, and the way that we love other people. Thank you for that grace. Jesus, thank you for the cross that makes it all possible. Thank you that you were willing to do everything, not because we deserved it, but because of your great, great love for us. And as we celebrate communion together today, I pray that we would remember how costly that love was. And that would encourage us to live lives of faith and action